Fat wallet thesis.
Yeah.
You guys haven't heard that one.
Tell us.
I think this might be a controversial point, but I think if you do the math, the base layer will have to do this.
The most important advancements in infrastructure over the last cycle, like since 2020.
How should we think about the progression of interoperability amongst all of these clusters and like bringing this all together as a whole? Welcome back to the Rollup, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Imagine if the world's GDP moved on chain. Guys, say GM to SafeNet. The newest protocol by Safe isn't a blockchain and it's not a new layer 2. It's a transaction processing network built to send money anywhere and swap anything on thousands of layer 2s from a single universal balance in sub 500 milliseconds. It's fast, it's smooth, and it's simple. And it's built with safe multi-sig level security in mind. SafeNet unlocks smart accounts across multiple chains, allowing users to supercharge security, scalability, and speed. So get started today at net.safe.global and remember to follow @safe on X. Nice. So you team offsite in Phuket before this, and
Yep.
yeah,
The 1KX founders event, right?
Yeah. I'm
something
not
like
sure if you
that.
saw the in the process of winning tweets that we put out.
Yeah.
in the process of winning.
Yeah. It's a joke, but
No, it's all good. We like the 1KX guys. Peter's a good friend of ours.
Peter's great, yeah.
We're glad to have you on. Way. I mean, it's your first time here. You have a PhD from UC Berkeley.
San Diego. Yeah.
RIP, RIP to my research.
What did you get your PhD in?
So computer science, that's the broader field, but my specialization was cryptography.
Oh, epic.
How'd you choose that?
Yeah, so I think people in this space might guess cryptography had a lot of applications in blockchains, but I actually knew about Bitcoin since the early days when I was in high school, like right early 2010s. And cryptography was not really something that, I saw as, okay, I'm going to do this to do blockchain, right? It was like, okay, I was actually doing theoretical computer science and cryptography was actually really interesting from a technical perspective, right? Back then I was a nerd, I was okay, I want to push the field forward. I want to just learn about cryptography, do the science. And this is mid 2010s. And that's how I got in, it was, I was just doing the science, doing the research. That's what I was interested in.
Nice.
How much longer do you think SHA-256 and RSA, how much longer do you think those are going to last?
Yeah, it's going to be a long conversation. But yeah, so I think SHA-2 is probably not going to get broken anytime soon, right? Even with quantum computers. Quantum computers doesn't really have a speed over breaking hash functions. I mean, yes, but we could actually mitigate that effect. Grove research does have a square root speed up. Okay, not to get into technical details, but I don't think the war is gonna end if quantum computers will be here, and all these things are actually pretty battle tested. RSA actually. It's actually harder to break RSA than elliptic curve cryptography that's used in Ethereum, for example.
Right. Okay. So maybe could you describe the current cryptographic architecture of Ethereum with its elliptic curves, and then how does that differ from something the RSA protocols that Visa and when someone buys something online, they put in their credit card, and that's the cryptography that kind of the off-chain online world uses. What is the difference between that and the cryptography on Ethereum?
Yeah, so it's actually very, very similar. Ethereum uses basically one primitive. It's called it's signature schemes, right? ECDSA, and currently Ethereum 2.0 consensus uses BLS signatures over this curve called BLS 12.381, I think. And these are actually very well understood, right? But when you talk about rollups, ZK. That's a very, very different branch of cryptography, right? These days called programmable cryptography, right? And so there's a difference between cryptography for Web 2, encryption signatures, and Ethereum also uses that, right? Signature schemes are very, very well understood. And then this new school of what I call cryptography for Web 3 or programmable cryptography, that is way more fancy. It's it's slower. There's computational overhead. There's a lot of progress, right? We can get into the details, right? But actually, if you think about what cryptography does, it's really a tool, right? And if you program piece of smart contract on a rollup, you don't actually get to see the ZK part, right? And I think like a lot of times, I think people actually over-index on the cryptography, but actually it's really about the functionality, right? And in cryptography, it's really just defensive measure to make sure you have the right properties. But to the end programmer, most of the time, you don't actually want to worry about the cryptography, right? It's behind the scenes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we could
To the
go
end
into,
user.
Yeah, we'll go into cryptography, or we could like talk about application.
I'm going to take this right into this tweet about this technical domains investing into applications.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I think this is a great segue from, while I'd love to go deep into cryptography, we might have to save this for a visual podcast where we do like a presentation. And like, I'm much more of a visual learner, and I think our audience is as well. But what is funny is that you were trolling Kyle Samani on Twitter about his tweet about being a founder or a venture capitalist that's not technical. And then you went in to do a quote tweet that was like some takeaways from a venture capitalist or a researcher that is technical. And so like when you're looking at the scope of these projects that you guys are investing in at 1KX, like how much of your technical expertise do you use to look forward into valuations, and how does like your technical background influence your decision making from the fund perspective, and like how does it change the way that you see crypto projects?
Definitely, and I'll answer that question in two ways, right? So I think one is really about kind of evaluation of the actual technical meat of the project, and I think this really shows up in looking at ZK and FHE projects, and it's just easier to actually understand, is there something that's really happening here, or is it something that's vaporware, right? And for that, like I can really get a pretty good quick high level take, but actually that's not the important part. I think really what makes a great investor is really about active investing and being contrarian and being countercyclical and trying to find the next new thing. And I think that's the part, if you actually read my thread, I think in infrastructure, early stage, and in crypto, right, we're investing in emerging technology that will be the next generation of platforms. And when you think about what comes next, right, and tech will improve, right? There will be next. If you look at how technology have really developed over the last century, really there needs to be technical advances to really enable the next generation of platforms that will be fundamentally different than what we have today. And I believe that they'll continue to be true, which means that to really catch a venture case, you want to invest in things that actually are net new, right? And there's two ways this could go. One is, you can just find them. Someone come up with an idea, maybe this was Ethereum, when was only Bitcoin around, and you invest in that. And second is, I think, more active work, and that's the part I like to do, which is, hey, I'm a researcher. Let me think about what would be the next step, and let me talk about it, right? And let me work with the founders and actively try to work with them together as a team to figure out, okay, what is the next thing. And I think that's the part that's really differentiates a technical investor rather than an investor that is maybe more narrative driven, or like when things are more de-risked. I just love to think about what comes next and do that together with founders.
Yeah. It's like, so it's you can identify something that is net new, but by kind of being there at the right time and like understanding where the space could go and that could exist already, or you can have your own ideas, your own thoughts from this research perspective, and then go out and either persuade or work with founders that are top of the line, and like work with them to like build this idea together that kind of stems internally because of your technical background.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, and so you mentioned an important thing, which I think was like the infrastructure for blockchain and for the space has made this kind of jump to being like it's ready. I mean, like my takeaway from your first point was like the infra side has been invested in, it's been built, it's been it's ready to kind of field the next. What's next? These net new applications. And you recently also tweeted that blockchains are application platforms. And I also think that 1KX is pioneering this kind of shift to really wanting to invest in applications and has already done so. So maybe you could walk us through like your mental model for this next era of blockchains being application platforms, then like why you believe that and how that's driving some of your investing thesis.
Yeah, so at 1KX, we have a pretty broad set of investment categories, right? So I focus on infrastructure. And, so I don't really look at applications myself, and that's actually, Peter's focus area. And so, but, we actually discuss a lot in, is the next generation of platforms ready? And, if you look at applications today, you might deploy smart contracts on Ethereum, Solana. You might want to do app chain, right? And a lot of people are doing that, right? And more applications are becoming chains, app chains. There's different frameworks, and I think really you evolve. Some people talk about this like infra cycle, application cycle, and I think it's really both are advancing, right? There's infrastructure that we built that enable the next set of applications, because maybe applications today will run into problems. So for example, if you look at application in the last cycle, when they're built as smart contracts, we run into fee spikes, right? And that's why infrastructure evolved to say, okay, let's do horizontal scalability with rollups, and let's have less fee markets, right? But then we run into interoperability problems, right? So I think there's going to be a back and forth where we'll have the current generation of infrastructure, and applications will saturate that form factor and figure out, okay, actually we'll have problems, and then infrastructure will evolve then to solve those set of problems, and then you have this like back and forth, but at the same time, right, the space is expanding. So
but
as
where
we
are
solve
we
these
now?
problems,
Do you think? Are we in the seesaw?
It's the seesaw is like happening like at the same time.
Always, right?
Yeah, always,
Okay.
always.
Okay.
I don't think there's going to be like a ad versus infra cycle.
What do you, and maybe another way to ask that question is like, what do you think are the most transformative infrastructure unlocks, net new infrastructure unlocks that have occurred in recent years, like since we kind of got our last wave of new applications? What have been those new infrastructure
like post
pieces?
DeFi?
Yeah. So like, we had Ethereum and that gave way to Uniswap, but then, we had gas costs that spiked. And so we couldn't invent net new applications because we had high gas costs. We had to solve that. So that the seesaw went to infrastructure. Now we've improved the infrastructure, but like, what do you think were the most important piece, like the most important advancements in infrastructure over the last cycle, like since 2020?
Obviously, it's rollups. Obviously, it is ways to launch blockchains without with trust minimized security in a way that doesn't actually congest the base layer, right? Horizontal scalability. I think we're moving in that direction, and there's like asterisks, right? So for example, if you share the same DA layer, you're actually not too horizontally scalable when that DA layer has a bottleneck. But at the settlement layer, there's settlement aggregation. We don't actually run into bottlenecks. So I think if you look at this past cycle, obviously it is these horizontally scalable platforms, right? And then which then evolves into clusters. And now, the key question now is, for these rollup clusters, how do these rollups applications actually contribute to the overall ecosystem?
Yeah,
right?
like connecting
do we
them.
actually have network effects, right? And I think that's still in the process of being figured out. I think different clusters are proposing different mechanisms to like build this network effect, right? But I don't think we're at the end game yet, where really. Ethereum value accrual is a real problem. Right?
Yeah. What do you think the consequences of like making it very easy to launch a new app chain? What do you think are the consequences on ETH value accrual?
It depends on how Ethereum or other rollup clusters fix their tokenomics, or what type of. So I think if you think about why Ethereum Solana, like this R1 model, really works, is because every single application uses the same gas token, and so if you have an application deployed there, your users will have to hold the token. The users share the same wallet infrastructure, meaning that if you are a user for one application, you'll have assets now that can go to other applications. If you just think from this first principle, apply this to rollups, right? Actually, there's friction there, right? Okay, sure, you might be using the same wallets, but you have to bridge now, right? And you don't actually have to hold the same gas token. So will this actually have this effects on the cluster token? I think the answer is very, very unclear, very open question right at the moment, right? So can rollup clusters actually design like correct tokenomics to actually replicate the success of these all ones?
So when you're thinking about, and let's use kind of rollup maybe like a portfolio company of yours like as a proxy for these rollup clusters, or even for Ethereum.
ZK Sync maybe.
Okay, so like how would you recommend ZK Sync build network effects?
So ZK Sync is building elastic chain, right? It's technically on a technical level, it's where sequencing era was one rollup. Now there's a settlement contract, right? And every single rollup that's in the Elastic chain in the Elastic chain cluster will share the same liquidity settlement contract, and they are building interoperability solutions where you can read and write to other chains asynchronously. And with pre-confirmation, this will be about 1 to 2 second latency. And I think they're shipping this. So this is actually live on mainnet, and they're shipping different components of this, into next year. And the network effect comes from liquidity, shared liquidity, and comes from interop. Right? It's not exactly the same interop as Ethereum dApps. So in the sense that it's not within the same block, but that's actually the key reason why you can add more and more elastic chains without a bottleneck. And so,
yeah, one point on that. We've spoken about this idea of monetary velocity. And if you can get the velocity of money flowing through your ecosystem at a higher rate, then you can get rehypothecation at the good part of rehypothecation flowing. You can get liquidity into new applications more easily, more quickly, and then you can reuse that. You can kind of turn it over faster and faster. And then that ends up leading to more efficient network effects as this liquidity moves amongst your network faster and faster. And so to your point, interop, connecting these chains together, all of this adds to the monetary velocity within an ecosystem.
Exactly, yeah. And I think if you are building a rollup and you are deciding where do I build this? Do I build this directly on top of Ethereum? Do I build this on Elastic Chain? You look for value added by that ecosystem to you, right? Do I have users that's already on there? Are they already using the assets that I want to support on my rollup? Will I create assets that these users want to purchase, right? And or hold? And I think that's how rollup clusters think about answering that question for which set of application rollup builders is key, right? Like, is there a network effect? How do I increase monetary velocity within my ecosystem? How do I, and more importantly, how do I accrue part of that value, right? And I think that the problem for Ethereum is that there's so much value that's going into these L2s, and actually so much value that's internal to these L2s. And a case in point, if you look at Base, the amount of value that's minted on Base natively, it's quickly growing. It's growing way faster than canonically bridged value. And the reason is because, right, Base is a vibrant ecosystem. People want to launch meme coins on there. And that asset is not on Ethereum. It's actually on Base. And it will not actually move easily into other rollups, even in the super chain.
But wouldn't it also just move to L1 at some point as well?
So
theoretically,
currently, it currently can't actually do that.
Well, you could sell it to ETH. You could sell your meme coin and then
ETH.
go to bridge it to the L1.
Yes.
So isn't any sort of value creation on L2s also then could potentially be valuable for Ethereum L1 in the future?
Redstone is DeFi's modular oracle, supporting over 100 clients on over 50 chains and offering 1,000 assets. Redstone is the leader for Bitcoin staking and yield-bearing assets. They offer the most robust, customizable price feeds available in any model. Join the Redstone exhibition today. Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet. Bridge your tokens and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fraxtal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity.
Yes, I agree. I think
Okay.
yeah, that's a really good point. But what if I'm another super chain user and I want to hold some meme coin from base? What do I do? Right.
You're not going to L1 at all.
Right. And I think there's a main problem, right? Which is yes, it creates more assets and kind of just liquidity that's on a rollup, but that actually doesn't get bubbled to like L1 or other L2s. So I actually wrote this ETH research post, I think around ETC a couple months ago.
Yeah.
So I think we can canonically bridge assets from L1 to L2, right? From L2 to L3. We should actually do it the reverse way as well. So I call this reverse canonical bridging or two-way canonical bridging, where you could say that actually if you have a base meme coin, I can actually bridge it back to L1, right? Using the exact same security mechanism that the super chain uses. The same will apply to, for example, elastic chains, right? So you can have this effect where maybe Degen, right? This super chain, arbitrum orbit L3 will be able to say, okay, no, our assets actually bridge back to the arbitrum 1, then back to L1, but then can be going to base or going to elastic chains like Ticketing Era.
Yep.
I think this could be a standard actually. And
So
I think,
is that your mental model for like this cross roll-up cluster? Because we talked a lot about like there's like inside of these roll-up cluster interop in terms of value accrual, and I think their standardizations are happening way faster than kind of like broader standards. But like, is this a similar mental model that you have to like the broader cross roll-up interoperability, or like how should we think about the progression of interoperability amongst all of these clusters and like bringing this all together as a whole?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And maybe what I have just mentioned, two-way canonical bridging
Yeah,
is one way to
could
kind
be part of it.
Yeah, like across cross cluster. And that's actually very simple EIP. I think we could, the community could come together and agree on. But yeah, there's a lot of other aspects to this. I think, to be honest, interop within a cluster is probably something that will be solved first, and then we will see interop between clusters. And I think that maybe the question is more to Ethereum, right? As rollup clusters proliferate and build their own ecosystems, how would Ethereum respond as a base layer?
Got it.
So the two-way canonical bridging is functionally or technically possible because both of these coins are ERC20s, but like what are the implications on security and like the trust principles of moving an asset that's native on base like back onto the L1?
It will use the same settlement contract, right? So imagine when you deposit or withdraw from base, you're interacting with settlement contract that base has on L1. This will be the exact same mechanism, but instead of for canonical wrapped assets, it will be for assets on base. So the security is effectively exactly the same.
You would have a similar like mint and lock or mint and burn mechanism.
Yeah. So imagine basically on base, there's a system contract that will say if you transfer asset to me, I will actually mint it for you on L1, right?
Yeah.
And so and this is actually, it creates a lot more network effects on Ethereum base layer. And
Right.
because it actually requires storage. So right now, the settlement contracts on L1 for all these rollups, it actually requires minimal storage. And so it's not actually paying much to Ethereum. But imagine if you actually to reverse bridge a lot of meme coins back to L1. Each of this, so for each coin and each holder, this actually incur a storage slot, right? And so this is actually a good way for Ethereum to actually like price these things, right?
Yeah.
As it creates network effect, it gets to actually price this in the form of like payment into L1.
Yeah, and as you're kind of like moving this into the L1, this wouldn't require you to sell the token, which was like one example of like potential like accrual back to ETH, but it would also solve for some of this parasitic L2 type of rhetoric because you would end up with more value accrual to the Ethereum protocol, and then in kind of like transitively ultimately back to ETH the token. And so how does, like when you're thinking about storage slots, like what are the economics behind that? Because I mean we hear a lot about like transactions and DA and like how some of these things end up accruing value to ETH, but we don't hear so much about storage slots. Like what is that in terms of a settlement contract? What are kind of the economics that are around that, and how do they accrue value?
Yeah, so if you look at Ethereum today, the state is increasing, right? We actually removed the opcode to, destroy contract codes, and I think there's state and there's history. Right? History is forever growing, and state. And then there's the question like, do we actually try to remove part of the state? So right now, if you pay for storage slots, it's 20K gas on one, and that storage slot will be there forever, right? So effectively, you're paying it one time, and every single full node that want to produce and execute transactions will have to store that storage slots, right? So this is a conversation on 4444. Do we actually try to limit the amount of working state over time? And do we do state rent? So Solana does state rent, and I think it's actually the correct choice. And so effectively, if you have state rent, Ethereum, I think it's, Vitalik put out this four parts post, which includes this transition, right? Once we move into state rent, so every single piece of state that has to be stored on L1 will actually generate value for the L1 because it needs to be paid for.
Is this part of the purge?
I believe so. I'm actually not too familiar with exactly which part fits into which part, but this sounds like the purge.
Yeah, because this is an attempt to solve the state bloat issue on Ethereum and limit the amount of storage slots. Would that limit this kind of possibility for two-way canonical bridging? If you had to limit the amount of meme coins that you can bridge back to the L1?
Well, it's a market, right? And I think Ethereum will only accrue that value if its market for storage slots is actually saturated, right? If you look at DA,
it's almost there. It's almost saturated.
We're almost getting there, right? But before, the price is zero, right?
By the time this comes out, it'll be saturated.
Exactly, and so we actually want to use these storage slots.
Yeah.
If you look at if everyone moved to L2 Rollup, or even L3s, how much storage will be on L1? It's basically zero. Like we'll have some state commitments, and that's it. Like we're using a lot of DA, but like the actual state storage on L1 for these settlement contracts is very, very small. And so this is actually a mechanism for Ethereum to take control, right, of this market and actually put more demand on there. And so I think it's actually really good way to fix the rollup ecosystem and accrue more value back to Ethereum.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that some of these newer rollup ecosystems that are being launched, or some of them call themselves rollup ecosystems, they've seen this problem, and like they've had the advantage of being able to build their stacks after Ethereum's rollup-centric roadmap has played out, after Cosmos app chains have played out. And so yeah, I don't know if you guys did any of these recent ones. Like the ones that come to mind are Anisha, Delta, Pod, and these are all kind of like Pod and Delta are interesting. They're calling themselves almost like consensus lists, and then Anisha's got this L1 just used for state transitions and for liquidity for their L2s, basically app chains focused, and so we have these dynamics where these ecosystems are like solving these problems that Ethereum's facing, where it's like, is Ethereum an execution environment? Is it a DA layer? It's like, no, Anisha's L1 is just for state transitions and just as kind of like this like proof of liquidity type of hub. And then Delta and Pod have these kind of like domain models and these consensus list models. And so, I'm curious on like what your thought of like this next iteration of these roll-up ecosystems are. Like, is this something that like will keep being iterated on? Are these exciting to you? It's interesting to me because they're able to build these ecosystems after seeing all the problems of Cosmos and Ethereum.
Yeah, and taking a step back, I think so. Blockchains are application platforms, and application platforms could take different shapes and forms, and they don't actually have to be an L1 blockchain, right? And I think the way that we have evolved from Ethereum L1 to rollups to shared settlement to shared sequencing to proof confirmation, that's a very specific way of doing things, and it has gotten us to a point that it's hard to navigate, right? I would say it's a local optimum point, right? But if you just zoom out, let's build application platforms for applications with security, interoperability, sovereignty for the application, and network effect, right? And if that's the question, I think there's other ways to approach this. And we've seen increasing number of projects trying to take this first principle approach. How do we build application platforms? What are the features that could be different than the current platforms? I think if you take a really long view of this, there'll be better and bad platforms. I don't think Solana today, right? I think it will quickly congest, just like Ethereum did in 2020. And yeah, and there's also concretely there's a couple of different advances that will be really hard to integrate back into Ethereum and Solana. So for example, orderless consensus. It turns out if you just do settlement, or if you want to do auctions as a service, you don't actually need ordering, and we can actually have faster way of getting things arriving into consensus. Another example is, so that's on the consensus layer, right? We talk about parallel execution, and it turns out, right, orderless consensus actually goes really well with parallel execution, because certain ordering doesn't matter when things are parallel, right? And so so I think we're seeing increasing number of projects. And you mentioned a few, right? Pod, Delta, Inisha. We're very, very excited about this, newer directions.
Yeah, and so you wrote in one of your posts like these are interesting from an application perspective because unlike Ethereum, you can quote unquote tax economic flow through the system and have that accrue to the base asset, or you can build interoperability out of the box like Cosmos did, but then Cosmos kind of struggled to really get the underlying network effects of having like one hub, right? The Cosmos hub never really kind of accrued that value, and then you can also have, and I think Inisha does this well. I'm not so sure about Pods and Delta; they're a little bit more early in the development. You have these like sovereign app chains that can control their MEV, their transaction logic. You can do application-specific sequencing for some of your apps on the L1 per se. So like, you get these like features, this feature set out of the box that feels like the logical next iteration of like the broader community agreeing that like horizontal scaling is the way, but then like here's how we can improve on it. And so I mean, from an investing thesis, it must seem like an easy kind of idea to back or to like see value in just basically on those three iterations that you put in that post.
Yeah, definitely. Interoperability is what applications want. Sovereignty, right? Able to retain its own MEV, customize the VM, and third, more importantly, taxing the economic value, economic kind of velocity in its ecosystem. I think this might be a controversial point, but I think if you do the math, the base layer will have to do this. I don't think it's a question of should the base layer do this or not. It's a question of like exactly like how much, right? How to do it properly. And I think the analogy I want to use is, blockchains are application platform are countries, and applications on there are maybe like companies and individuals, and the country should generate a network effect security, right, for its constituents. But constituents will create value and then contribute back to that country, right? And I think that's a really good analogy because in a system like that, you had to think about how do we properly set up the incentives, economic factors so that everything works properly.
That just we hear that analogy a lot, like the countries analogy. For some reason, I thought about the fat protocol thesis and fat application thesis, and I had never really thought about that in the country analogy with that. Because like in that analogy, you have citizens, maybe those are the applications, and then you have the country as the protocol, and the people in a country make money, like they make a living, right? And then you have the country that also makes money, and they make money by taxing like the citizens or in the country. And so it's not so much about fat application or fat protocol thesis. It's both.
Fat ecosystem.
Fat ecosystem.
What about fat wallet thesis?
Yeah.
You guys haven't heard that one?
Tell us.
The fat wallet thesis is the aggregation of all of this. It's like whoever controls the end user relationship can basically aggregate all of the applications and all of the chains and just control all the order flow as well as the end user kind of relationship and just have this fat value accrual. Like MetaMask charges, I think 0.5% or 0.85% on swaps. Phantom has a similar thing. So these wallets are like this next era of this application thesis.
I would argue that Ethereum is the wallet of the app chain ecosystem. And actually, David Hoffman from Bankless made this on like a panel that he was on. Basically, that Ethereum is the launch pad for other app chains, and it's been the only ecosystem that has encouraged other projects to launch their own chain. And so in the same way that you're talking about wallets as this middle ecosystem aggregation of users as well as chains, and kind of like that intermediaries, probably not, but it's like more of a portal into that world.
It's the front end.
Ethereum is the portal into the
distribution.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Platform application platforms should also offer distribution, right?
Yep.
The way I think about this is like think about App Store and like AWS. So like we want to build a blockchain that's both simultaneously like AWS, like the backend, but also like the App Store.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of your guys' portcos, Abstract, which disclaimer, we also have invested in Abstract, like seed round 2022 when everything was dead. They're like, I think they're
Same round.
Yeah, same. They're building. You guys have way more size, but that's okay. They're building like this consumer portal in addition to this global wallet, and like also have this idea of like this app store that you come on, you interact with, and then you kind of have like this consumer fund chain. Like, I don't know. The question is like, what makes Abstract appealing to you guys now? And I know you guys doubled down once they were kind of building this out. We're kind of coming to a wrap up here, so I think this is a good place to kind of end out as like Abstract as an application platform. Why is this a good example of something that you believe in as like the future of distribution and of kind of blockchain for consumers?
Yeah, definitely. So, brands are really effective ways of building a platform, right? And I think to a certain extent, Ethereum Solana has built a brand, but when you actually have like Web2 builders, like traditional founders coming in and building a brand that is not necessarily like from the crypto native community, right? I think that that is somewhat underexplored, and I think the Pudgy team, Abstract, it is basically doing in the best way possible, right? And so this is like coming from a different perspective, right? How do you really create this community? And I think, so that's really the edge that they have. And I think they'll continue to harness the edge that they have, right? And you'll bring net new users to the space, which is perhaps not possible if you just talk about, okay, let's build a new blockchain.
Yeah.
Right?
But what about their funnel, right? So like, let's say they have this brand, they bring users on chain. Like, what is your vision for like blockchain as application platforms as like a funnel for value accrual for like Abstract token at the end, or even like all the way down to ETH at the end? Like how does this work? How does Pudgy Penguin buys a toy, comes on chain, Pudgy World, then goes to Abstract? How does that turn into like revenue?
I think you had to bring Peter onto the podcast. Maybe
Okay.
debate. I have debate with Peter a lot,
Okay.
because it's good debates in the sense that, look, I do infrastructure, and Peter focuses on consumer, and if you look at Web 2, actually, the applications typically verticalize and become the infrastructure, right? With Google, Facebook, Meta, right? But in the Web 3 world, it has been different, right? The infrastructure becomes the bigger player, and how this evolve into the future is something that's an open question. I think we'll see interesting consumer applications verticalize and become infrastructure. We'll also see infrastructure project becoming brands themselves, like Ethereum Solana,
dog-fooding their own.
And so I think there's convergence here, and both sides will continue to make progress, right? And there's players to watch on either side.
It's the final loop from the beginning of the conversation
I was
of the
thinking the
apps and
same
infra
thing.
cycle. So, Wei, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming out, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, man.